Okay, so we're here on Daf Ayin Aleph on the Beis, and we're studying the Sugya of Rabbi Chanina, which is the beginning of the Gemara here. Let's go through it again. Rab Chanina ben Noach shebirech es Hashem, v'acher kach nizgayer poter. Hol v'nishtane dino, nishtanes misasa. Which means the following, that all the dinim that apply to Ben Noach, like, for example, he could be judged by one judge and with the testimony of one single witness and without Asra, none of those dinim apply as a Yisrael after its Gerus. And the Misa is a different Misa because as a Ben Noach, he's Chayiv Sayev, as a Yisrael, he's Chayiv Skila. Name him Mesayele. Can we prove Rabbi Chanina's principle based on our Mishnah Ben Soromore? Right? Barach ad shelo nigmar dino, v'ach kachikif zaken atachton poter. The Gemara now assumes that if we catch up to him, and he's already past the age of candidacy for Misa as a Ben Soromor, he gives Zaken Atachton, then he's Potter. Why? My time Allah Mishum Damrin hold the Ishtane, since now his din is changed, at the point in which we want to be Gomer Estino, he would no longer be Chayev as a Ben Soromor for the same violations of Zolol V'Soveh, and therefore we cannot put him to death based on his earlier record when he was Zol V'Soveh before Hikib HaZakan. And the Gemara rejects this. Look, you cannot prove Rabbi Chanina from the case of a Ben Soromor Shabarach. Shani Hachat the Ovid Hashta La Bar K'tolahu. If now, after we catch up with him and it's he keeps Zaken Atachton, he would implement the Zol V'Soveh, the same Aveir, the same criminal behavior, he would not be put to death. Whereas in the case of a Ben Noach Shabirach Hashem, V'achach Nizgayer, if now after Gerus he would repeat that same Aveira of Klola, right, Birach Hashem, he would be put to death. Now, I grant you it's not the same Misa, right? He'd be Chayiv Skila instead of Sayev, but nevertheless, he still would be Chayiv Misa. So that's not really Hol V'Shtani. It's a minor change, but not a major change. And therefore, if we only had our Mishnah Ben Soromora, we would still assume that a Ben Noach Shabirach Hashem would be Chayev Misa even after his Gerus. We would put him to death. I would assume that if we rejected Rab Chanina, we would put him to death by Sayed. Well, we'll see about that. Toshma. Let's read the Sefer of our Mishnah. Imi nigmar dino barach. If there already was a gzar din, like the Gemara is not operating with Gabra Ketila at this point. The akakach hikif zaken atachton chayev. So what are we saying now? That if we catch him after the Gemara din, we'll put him to death, even though it's after Hikiv Zaken Atachton. So this would apparently contradict Rab Chanina. Right. So the answer is no. Nigmar dino ka'amrit, nigmar dino gavrik tilahu. There's no question from the din of Nigmar Dino Barach, because Nigmar Dino Barach, he's a Gavra Ketili after the Gmar Din, and we just are carrying out that punishment of Misa. He's already considered like another mace, and we're not going to pater him because of the Shtana Dino. He's already dead, so to speak. Toshma Benoach Shehiko es Chavero Ubal Eshes Chavero Benisgayer Potter. So we're talking about a case of a Ben Noach that attacks another Ben Noach, or has a relationship with Eshes Ben Noach. Ben Isgayer Potter. Why is he Potter? I would say because we can't put a Yisrael to death for this criminal act, because we can't judge him as a Ben Noach. He's no longer Ben Noach. And as a Yisrael, he would not be Chai. So we want to he's Potter. But Asa came to Yisrael. Now the guy killed a Jew, or he had a relationship with an Ashes Ishmi Yisrael, and then he was misguided. Chayev, he's Chayev Misa. So the Gemara raises another kasha on Rabbi Chanina. Another objection on why is he chayav in Asa came to Yisrael? Neima hol v'shtani ishtani. All the dinim change. He could be condemned to death as a guy, even on the basis of one judge, one witness, and even without Asra. In the case of Israel, the dinim have changed. We need 2 Eidim, we need a Bezdin of 23 judges, we need Asra. And therefore, based on the principle of Rabbi Chanina, namely Ishtani, we should say here in this case, they should be potter. So the Gemara answers, Dino umisaso be'inan. When does Rabbi Chanina apply the ptur of Ishtani? That's only when not only the dinim changed, but even the misa changed. But high in this case, Dino Ishtani, right? Because you need 2 Eidim and you need Asra, you need a Bezdin of 23 judges. But misasalo Ishtani. So let's talk about Goy Shaharig Yisrael. He's Chayev Misa Sayed. And now he's a ger. and the same misa of Saif applies. So a ger, or for that matter, any Jew that kills a Jew is put to death with Saif. So therefore, Reb Chanina's principle doesn't apply in this case. There's no real ishtani. It's a ishtani dina, but lo ishtani misa. We need ishtani misa plus. We need ishtani dina plus ishtani misa. Gemara says bishlema. I understand rotzeach. Meikar sayev ashta sayev. Ella ashes ish. Meikara, as a guy, is chayiv sayev. V'hashta chenek. And that's what we saw in the Mishnah, if you remember, in Eloheina Nechnakim, that on the list of those criminal acts that generate chenek, one of them is Baal Eishes Ish. So therefore, the Gemara argues that in the case of a guy, Shebal Eishes Yisrael, Eishes Ish, and then he becomes a ger, he should be potter. Why? Because not only is it ishtani dina, it's also ishtani misa. We changed it from a misa of sayev to a misa of chenek. So the Gemara answers, Naira Murasa. The Ben Noach had a relationship with the Naira Murasa, the Idi Beskila. In both cases, whether he's a Ben Noach or a Yisrael, for that criminal act, he incurs the same visa of Skila. And therefore, he's high. There's no ishtani dina. No ishtani misa. So in both cases, a Ben Noach Baal Naira Murasa Shal Yisrael, and in the case of the Yisrael Baal Naira Murasa, the chiyuv is skila. So this is based on a Gemara on Daf Nun Zayin. So this is where we got up to yesterday. Let's go on. For also came be Yisrael Dumya Deishas Kavero K'tan. The Gemara objects. How can you say that the Brisa is talking about a case of Baal Naira Murasa? It says Eishes Chavero. So what does the Gemara see in the words Eishes Chaver? Why are those so significant? It says Ben Noach Sheboal Eishes Chaver v'Niskayer Potu. That's the case of Eishes Chavero. another god. I mean, in this case, the wife of another god. Then it goes on, and it speaks about Asa Kain B'Yisrael Chai. Now, in the first case of Eishes Chavero, we're not distinguishing between an Arusa and an Isua. We're talking about a woman who is married to a guy. That's called Be'ulas Chavero. There's no Tfisas Kiddushin, so the concept of Erisin is completely out of place with regard to Ben Noach. So then when we get to the next halacha of Baal Eishes Ishmi Yisrael, again we're talking about an Isua and not an Ira Amurasa. And in the case of an Isua, then in a guy would be Chayav Sayev, and Baal Eishes Ish Yisrael is Chayav Chenek. So it's two different misos. And yet it says in the Brisa he's Chayav. Why should he be Chayav? According to Rabbi Chanina, it's Ishtani Misasa. Ella says the Gemara, the Brisa is talking about a Ben Noach. Shebal Eishes Ish Yisrael. If it's Eishes Ish Yisrael, now we have a case of Ishtana Misaso, because after Gerus he be Chayav Sayed. I'm sorry, after Gerus he be Chayav Chenek. The Gemara says, Kala b'chamura meshach shaykh. Okay, so now let's see if we can figure out what this means. Kala b'chamura meshach shaykh. So which misa is chamura? Which misa is kala? So now we're comparing sayif to chenek. And he says here that chenek is kala yoser misayif. Not sure why that's so, but so as a guy, he was chayav sayif, and that's more chamur than he be chayav for Baal Eishes Yisrael as a ger, because then he's going to incur a chiyuv chenek. So the original misa as a guy is more chamur than the misa as a Yisrael, which, by the way, in and of itself is something that bothers my mind, because by entering into Yisrael, he goes down a level, and we'll let him get off easy because he's a Jew. I don't know, I mean, we always go min hakal lachomer when we go from a goy to Yisrael. That's called kedusha kala kedusha chamura. Here, in a sense, we're going down to a kedusha kala. Now, the Gemara is assuming that a misa chamura sort of swallows up a misa kala. It almost has the misa kala within itself, but we add even a more greater chumrah. So, as a guy, he would really get the misa of chenek. Why? Because the misa of sayif includes, since it's one notch up on the totem pole, and it's more chamer than chenek, therefore it includes chenek. So that's not called the shinu misa. So shinu misa means when you go from, let's say, sayif to skila, which is going from a kal to a chamer. But if you go from a chamer to a kal, like from sayif down to chenek, that's not called the shinu misa. So again, in the case where a guy was bar al eshes ish mi Yisrael, and then he was misgayer, we're going to put him to death with chenek. But that's not called ishtani misaso, because even without gerus, he would be chayiv chenek, although not in the form of chenek, it would be chenek plus, which is called sayif, because sayif is more chomer than chenek. But in the case of Mavarchas Hashem, then we're going to offer him a misa chamuriosa, which is skila, had he done the same criminal act after gerus, and that's going to be considered nishtane misasa. Okay, then that's what we have so far in the Gemara. I'm just going to get myself a drink. Okay. So now we're going to present a Hakira, two ways of understanding Rab Chanina and why you put. How does Nishtana Dino Umisasa work? One way of saying it is that really he's Chayav Misa for the Avera that he perpetrated as a guy. But we cannot put him to death now after Gerus because Mimanavshach. There's no possibility of Bezdin carrying out his punishment. If we would put him to death with Sayif, because that's the Avera that he violated as a guy, but now he's after Gerus. And in the case of Yisrael Birchas Hashem, he would not be put to death with Misas Sayif. Okay, let's put him to death with Skila. But that we can't do because he didn't perpetrate the crime when he was Yisrael after Gerus, but rather as a god. So we're going to punish him now with Skila because of his Gerus for an Avera that he committed as a guy for which he would only be chayiv sayif. How can we do that? So again, we can't punish him with sayif because now he's Yisrael. And Yisrael for this Avera would get skila. We can't give him sayif because, again, starting him, we can't give him sayif because now he's Yisrael and he gets skila. We can't give him skila because he perpetrated the crime as a guy and he would only be chayiv for that crime sayif, and he wasn't Bavarachas Hashem after his gerus. So how can you put him to death with skila? I mean, it'd be more logical to put him to death with sayif, excuse me, because as he perpetrated the crime for which we're punishing him today, he was a guy who was chayiv sayif. But we can't implement a punishment to Yisrael based on the fact that he was once a guy, because Yisrael is not chayiv sayif. You can't put him to death with sayif if he's Yisrael, because Yisrael Shabirachas Hashem is not chayiv sayif. So that's one way of learning Rabbi Chanina. I would call it a svara, a mimanav shach. The other way of saying it, which again I'm inhibited about this because I think it requires a pasuk. I don't see that Rabbi Chanina is quoting a pasuk, but he might be saying just a legal technicality, and that is nishtana dino umisaso is potter. Hol v'ishtene. That generates a ptur. In that case, it would be some sort of exeris hakosav. But as I said before, I'm hard pressed to know where Rabbi Chanina is coming from. Does he have such exeris hakosav whole vishnei yishtei that he's potter? I don't know. I think it would be more logical to take the first approach that we suggested. I mean, the Gemara's language is hoel v'nishtane dino. What does that mean? Hoel v'nishtane dino means he no longer has the din of a ben Noach, he now has the din of Yisrael. And therefore, nishtanes misaso, his misa went from that of Sayiv as a ben Noach to that of Skila as a Yisrael. And therefore, we cannot put him to death as a guy with Saif because now he's Yisrael and his din is Skila. So you understand where the Ishtadei is. The Ishtadei means that his din has changed, his misa has changed, and therefore we can't give him the misa under the old law of Ben Noach because now his misa has changed. He's a Ben Yisrael. He's a ger. Okay, now the Gemara wants to prove Rabbi Chanina. I mean, the Gemara wants to disprove Rabbi Chanina would be more in an accurate way. The Gemara wants to raise an objection against Rabbi Chanina from the case of Ben Noach, Shehikas Chavero, or Baal Eshes Chavero, and then he was misguided. And the Brisa says, Potter. Also came be Yisrael, but this guy are Chayav. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean, Asa came be Yisrael Chayav? Why not say, Hol ve'ishtene ishtene? Dino umisasa. So Gemara says, okay, Rotseach, there's no shinui in his misa. So Mimanevshach, we can put him to death with Sayah. Because a Rotseach Yisrael is Chayiv Sayah. But Eshes Ish, that should be Ishtane Misaso, because now, as a Yisrael, he'd be Chayiv Chenek, and not Sayah. So then the Gemara answers, well, Kala b'chamura Meshech Shayach, which means that included in Sayah is Chenek, because Chenek is less Chamur. So let's take a look at Rashi. Ela Kala b'chamura, it's the third of the wide lines on the bottom. Klomar li olam v'yeshes ish. We're talking about Eshes Yisrael. Udeka kashaloch hamay chayev harei nishtana dino misa, so ein kan shini misa. V'yesh b'chlal misa chamura misa kala. Included in the misa chamura of Sayev is the misa kala of Chenek. Came when the mikar avi Sayev b'chamira, which is more common than Chenek. We don't know why, but hashta misas Chenek kala is bichlal misa zu hava v'yoser hayoroi lo michila. In other words, as a guy, he be chayiv more than Chenek. He be chayiv Sayev. Aval birkas Hashem meikar avi Sayev, which is kal v'hashta skila b'chamura. So what is Rashi telling us? That a misa kala is included in a misa chamura. So there's no shinui legabi misa, because as a guy he was chayiv for Baal Eshes Yisrael Sayev, and that's called a misa chamura. And as a Yisrael, he's only chayiv chenek, which is a misa kal. So far, so good. Now we look at Tosfos. Chenek, he misa kala, hayaroi lo mitchila, v'yosef. Okay, this is Rashi. That as a guy, he should get chenek and more than chenek. Why? Because Sayev is more than chenek. Now, Tosfos is going to quote a sugya, which we haven't seen yet, called Sarcha Ulavasof Bagra. So we're going to skip this for a while, and we're going to fast forward to the Nira Lefarish. Again, if you have the same Surah Sadaf that I have, from the bottom of the Tosfos, Dimir Maskal Kala, we count up approximately 10 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 lines. V'nira lefarish. The Chodek Omar Kala b'chamura Meshech Shaychi Lav lemeimar delo chashiv ishtene Tola. So again, what's Kala b'chamura Meshech Shaycha? Lav lemeimar delo chashiv ishnek tola. Right, the way we interpret it based on Rashi is it's not called ishnek tola because the kala is included in the chamura, and sayif includes and swallows up also chenek. To be komakom k'tola ishtene. Tosa says it doesn't matter one way or the other, whether you're going from kala to chamura or not, it's ishtene. You've changed the misa from sayif as a ben nochri to chenek as a Yisrael. Ella, so what does the Gemara mean that kala v'chamura meshach shaycha? Klomar, islan l'midenai v'kala keva d'mikara nischay af b'chamura mizu. So in other words, we should condemn him and judge him for chenek, the misa kala, because meikara nischayev af b'chamura mizu. Honestly, it's very similar to Rashi. I don't see the fundamental difference. I mean, what I'd like to do is open up the Biurei Atosfos in the back here of the Masifta. But before I do that, again, we'll read the Tosfos. Isla lemidayne bekala, keva de beikar nischayev af bechamura mizu, hello dami leben noach, Shabirach es Hashem delo daininan b'misa dahashta dechavura the meikar lo ischayev ba ub'misa the meikar nami lo keva dahashta lo shaychem. To me, it sounds identical to Rashi. I don't catch the nuances. Maybe because we skipped that part in the middle. I don't know. Again, in the case of Birchas Hashem, as a guy, he's chayev sai. Now he was this guy, and he should be chayev for the same avera skila. We can't give him skila, the misa dahashta, because the avera itself, as a ben noach, was perpetrated not as an avera chamura kolkach, but rather only as a chumrah that reaches the level of sayif, but not the level of skila. But if from the beginning, as a ben noach, he was chayav a misa chamura, like in the case of Baal Ish Ish, where sayif is chomer vis-a-vis chenek, so we would have to judge him for sayif. Just 1 second. No, maybe we should condemn him for chenek, because let's give him the lesser of the two punishments. To me, it sounds like Rashi. I don't really catch the difference between Tosfos and Rashi. But basically what we're saying is that we can't give him now a punishment which is more chomer than the punishment he would have incurred as a guy when he actually implemented the avera, the criminal act. So the Avera itself, as a Ben Noach, in the case of Birchas Hashem, would only generate a Chiyuv Sayif. Now what are we going to do? We're going to put him to death with Skila? How can we do such a thing? Meikara, when he violated the Avera, he was only Chayav Sayif. But now let's take the case of Baal Eishes Chavera. There he'd be Chayav Sayif as a goy, and now after Gerus, we go down a level and he's Chayav Chenek. That's not a problem. Because his original criminal act generated an onesh that's more chomer than the onesh of Chenek after Gerus. So if his Avera, the Mais Avera per se, generates an Onesh Chamur, then for sure we can implement the Onesh Kal, namely Chenek. But not so in the case of Mevarchas Hashem, where the original Avera B'Shaita would generate Chsayif, and now as the Yisrael, after Gerus, you want to be Mechayev him in Skila, which is more Chomer than Chenek. I'm sorry, than Sai. So I think I understand the sugya pretty well. Be'ezer Hashem. The only point that I don't have klar, what's the difference between Rashi and Tosfos here? To me, Tosfos is just reiterating what we said in Rashi. And the basic underlying theme or principle of Reb Chanina is the Mimonivsha. We have no way, no hechetimsa of implementing the Misa, not here, not there. We cannot implement the original Misa of Sayyid, because now as a Yisrael, he's Chayav Skila, which is a Misa Chamura. And we can't say that Sayif includes within it Skila. Lucy will say, okay, so we can't implement Skila. Well, let's give him Sayif. But we can't give him Sayif, as we said before, because now he's Yisrael, and Yisrael would be Chayav Skila. So it falls between the cracks. But in the case of Baal Eishes Chavero, where the guy himself would be Chayav Sayif, which is more chomer than Chen. Had he been a Yisrael, he'd be Chayav a lower punishment, a lesser punishment called Chenek. So in that case, where after Gerus, he would be Chayav for the same Avera, a lesser punishment, namely Chenek, now we could say that certainly we can implement Chenek. You'll say, but the Avera itself only generated Sayif, but Chenek is included in Sayif. The Misa Chamura swallows up the Misa Kal. So just to conclude our discussion with today, the reason I'm happy about this is because I never really understood another option. It always seemed to me that Rebbe Chanina was motivated by a svara of a manashach. He doesn't seem to invoke any gzeres hakosav, any pasuk. And his logic is that we can't give him the misa as a guy because he's Yisrael. We can't give him the misa as the Yisrael because that's more chomer than the Aver itself, which was generated as a guy and was deserving of a lesser punishment. But Enoch Hinami, if the first Misa would be more Chamor than the Misa as a Ben Yisrael, then we could give him the lesser punishment. And even though that lesser punishment is appropriate for Yisrael, but that would have been the punishment that he would have gotten according to the law, I mean conceptually, as he would get as a ben Noah, because the visa of Saif is relative to Chenek of Misa Chamur. And the Misa Chamur includes within it the Misa Kal. Okay then? So Bli Neder, I'm going to try to find time to see if I can come up with a difference between Rashi and Tosfos. But for that, I think we may have to learn that middle part of Tosfos that we skipped, which is the next sugya in the Gemara here on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. Okay then, so let me wish you a great day and thank you so much.